Imagine pulling off a heist on your own military hardware without ever being branded an outlaw. Picture commandeering a vessel packed with smuggled arms far out on the open ocean. Consider the possibility of wiping out nearly an entire enemy army's command structure in one single, secret strike. Envision using aircraft and simple ingenuity to steal exported military gear right out from under everyone's noses. If you believe all that is possible, then consider this final challenge. What about impersonating an enemy tank division to execute a massive sabotage mission deep inside their own territory, leaving them utterly bewildered? How does that sound? Welcome to a chronicle of daring missions where the rules of engagement were rewritten. This is a countdown of the most brazen, seemingly reckless, yet astonishingly successful operations conducted in the Middle East from the mid-20th century to the early 2000s. The narrative unfolds not by date, but by an escalating scale of sheer audacity, meticulous planning, and calculated nerve. Our journey begins not on land, but out on the waves. Occupying the fifth spot on this list is an operation that proved a nation will go to any lengths to reclaim what is rightfully its own. For this particular country, the sea is not a vacation spot or a scenic view. It is a vital, vulnerable border. With a limited coastline and constant threats from the water, naval superiority became a simple equation by the 1960s. Speed, vision, and striking first meant survival. The existing fleet, relying on aging World War II technology, was obsolete in a new era of missiles and electronics. The Navy needed a complete renewal. Fast, compact, and heavily armed missile boats were the answer. In 1965, a contract was signed with a modern French shipyard in Cherbourg for 12 such vessels. Payment was made in full, up front. Israeli engineers worked alongside their French counterparts, and the first 7 boats were delivered on schedule. Then, the political landscape shifted violently. The Six-Day War in June 1967 led France, under President Charles de Gaulle, to impose an arms embargo on Israel. 5 completed missile boats, fully paid for and legally Israeli property, were now impounded, sitting idle under tarps in Cherbourg harbor. French officials offered polite excuses, waiting for a political improvement that would never come. The Israeli naval attaché in France, Rear Admiral Mordechai Liman, knew legal arguments alone would not work. A blend of legal precision and military cunning was required. A small, secret team was assembled. Lawyers mapped the boundaries of permissible action. Logistics and covert operations specialists planned the practicalities. Secrecy was paramount. The resulting plan was bold in scope, yet flawless in its details. If a state could not receive the weapons, perhaps a private company could. If military vessels were barred from leaving port, they could be reclassified as civilian special-purpose ships. To provide a legally sound cover, a Panamanian shell corporation named Starboat Lines was created. The legend involved a reputable Norwegian shipowner, Øyvind Martin Seam, a respected businessman and war hero. The paperwork was impeccable. Contracts, insurance letters, and specifications were all crafted, with terms like missile boat carefully replaced with high-speed supply vessel. To port authorities, it was a routine private sale. Meanwhile, on the ground in Cherbourg, a different kind of work was underway. Crews arrived in tiny groups, posing as tourists and technicians. They lived separately, never acknowledging one another in public. Nightly, the diesel engines of the impounded boats were started under the guise of maintenance, making the sound a familiar part of the local night. Fuel and supplies were stockpiled gradually to avoid suspicion. The boats were renamed and renumbered, becoming Starboat 1 through 5. Port documents were updated to reflect the new civilian owner. One significant hurdle remained. French soldiers were stationed aboard the vessels as guards. The solution was as clinical as it was clever. Each guard was profiled. Their habits, health, even allergies were studied. A customized, non-lethal sedative was developed for each man. The order was clear. No casualties, no gunfire. If discovered, the teams were to surrender. The execution date was chosen with poetic precision. The night of December 24, 1969, Christmas Eve. Port activity was minimal, duty shifts were short, and a fierce Force 9 gale was raging. It was the perfect cover. No one would expect a departure in such weather. As midnight approached, the sedated guards drifted into a deep sleep. One by one, the boats slipped their moorings. Lights were doused, commands on the bridges were whispered. They vanished into the stormy darkness. The morning watch discovered empty berths. Panic ensued. The French defense minister was furious, but the military response was muted. Intercepting the boats would mean opening fire, sparking an international incident. Politically, France could claim it was merely a private transaction between two civilian entities. The boats were already beyond reach, nearing Portugal. The voyage itself was perilous. One boat sustained storm damage. Another had contaminated fuel. Mechanics had to perform a risky refueling at sea from a prearranged rendezvous with a neutral vessel. The route took them through the English Channel, the Bay of Biscay, past Gibraltar, and into the Mediterranean. Each leg carried its own risks from patrols and inspections. The most critical window was the first day, waiting to see if France would raise an alarm. The gamble paid off. France remained silent. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, the 5 boats slipped into the port of Haifa under cover of darkness. The arrival was low-key, a matter-of-fact repatriation of property. The strategic impact, however, was monumental. These Cherbourg-built SAR-class boats became the platform for Israel's Gabriel missile system. They were outfitted with new electronics and electronic warfare suites. In the 1973 Yom Kippur War, these very vessels demonstrated that naval battles could be won through superior technology and tactics, not mere numbers. They successfully engaged larger Arab fleets, including those armed with Soviet-made missiles. The operation, later named after the granddaughter of the overseeing officer, was a masterclass in legal maneuvering, intricate logistics, and behavioral camouflage. It showed how to make the extraordinary seem mundane. France issued formal protests but avoided a major confrontation, and Israel refrained from escalating the rhetoric. The stage was now set for even greater acts of daring. Moving to 4th place, we find an operation with a deceptively peaceful name. Consider the map once more. A tiny stretch of Israel's coastline, about 12 to 14 kilometers, is touched by the Red Sea. This maritime corridor became a crucial and vulnerable supply line. Fast forward to autumn 2001. The Second Intifada was raging. While land and air routes were heavily monitored, the sea remained a relative loophole. Arms smuggling was a constant concern. Intelligence suggested that figures within Yasser Arafat's circle had studied previous maritime operations. The plan that emerged bore similarities to past events, but with a deadly new purpose. Through intermediaries, a dilapidated cargo ship named the Rim K was purchased from a Lebanese company. The buyer was Adel Maghrabi, a known figure with ties to Hezbollah involved in procuring weapons for Palestinian groups. The ship was quickly reflagged under the Tanzanian registry, a process taking mere minutes. On paper, it was a commercial vessel named the Karine A. In reality, It was being prepared to carry a 50-ton threat. The financial mastermind was Fathi Shubaki, a veteran financier within Arafat's inner circle. The captain was Omar Akawi, a former Palestinian naval police officer. The operation connected the interests of the Palestinian Authority with those of Iran and Hezbollah. In December, under cover of darkness off Kish Island in the Persian Gulf, the Karine A took on its lethal cargo. Watertight containers were loaded, containing over 50 tons of weaponry. This included hundreds of Katyusha rockets in 122 and 107 mm calibers, mortar shells, anti-tank missiles, rifles, explosives, and even rubber boats and diving gear. Some containers were fitted with buoys for a drop and recovery method, an underwater delivery system to the Gaza coast. The plan was for the ship to sail through the Gulf of Oman, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, into the Red Sea, and then approach the Egyptian coast. From there, smaller Palestinian naval police vessels would collect the containers for the final run into Gaza. The scheme relied on the assumption that the vast sea would conceal their movements. But Israeli intelligence and naval surveillance had long treated the sea as a front line. A phantom cargo ship, avoiding ports and behaving erratically, had drawn their attention. The decision was made to intercept it far out in international waters before the cargo could reach land. In the pre-dawn hours of January 3, 2002, over the Red Sea, helicopters and naval commando boats closed in on the Karine A. The assault was swift and silent. The crew was caught completely by surprise. Captain Akawi surrendered without a shot being fired. The ship was commandeered and steered toward Eilat, where it docked on January 4th. Hours later, diplomats and officials showed international journalists not a hold full of goods, but an arsenal. The serial numbers and markings on the crates told a clear story. The seizure was a devastating blow. The ship itself was valued at around $400,000. The cover cargo of civilian goods added another $3 million. The weapons cache was estimated at $15 million. Had they reached Gaza or the West Bank, they could have dramatically shifted the balance of terror, putting Israeli cities and infrastructure at severe risk. The public revelation, with photographic evidence, shifted international opinion dramatically. In Washington, any remaining ambiguity about the Palestinian Authority's involvement in arms smuggling evaporated. Relations with Yasser Arafat deteriorated sharply. The Karine A incident underscored that maritime security was now a critical component of the conflict. Captain Akawi initially claimed ignorance, saying he thought he was carrying agricultural machinery parts, but later admitted knowledge. He was imprisoned. Fathi Shubaki was also convicted and served a lengthy sentence. The financial cost of the ship and cargo was significant, but the political cost to its backers was immeasurably higher. As one officer remarked while surveying the captured holds, "The sea remembers everything." This maritime drama served as a prelude to an even more audacious act in the skies. Our third entry takes us to a different kind of frontier, the night sky, where precision and nerve would achieve the seemingly impossible. The operation's name translates to rooster, a harbinger of the dawn, and indeed it preceded a war. On the evening of October 28, 1956, a strange aerial ballet unfolded over an Israeli airbase. A small, propeller-driven Harvard trainer took off, followed closely by a much larger, powerful Meteor jet fighter. They were a mismatched pair, a sprinter and a boxer. The reason for this unusual exercise lay in urgent intelligence. An Ilyushin Il-14 aircraft was scheduled to fly from Damascus to Cairo, carrying the entire Egyptian general staff, including Defense Minister Abdul Hakim Amr. Intercepting this target over the sea in pitch darkness, and doing so undetected, was a monumental challenge. 2 men were summoned. Pilot Yosh Sidin and navigator Ilan Shiv were the only specialists in the country capable of such a mission. The difficulty was immense. The Soviet Ilyushin was a slow, piston-engine aircraft with a cruising speed of about 217 miles per hour. The Israeli Meteor jet fighter had a minimum, near-stall speed of 186 miles per hour. Flying this slow made the Meteor extremely unstable. Add to this the total darkness, no navigation lights, thick fog, and the temperamental radar technology of the era, which required constant manual adjustment. To calibrate their approach, Sidin and Shiv flew practice runs behind the slow Harvard, learning how to maintain control at minimal speed and fine-tune their radar. Just hours before the mission, they were ready. As evening approached on October 28th, Signals Intelligence confirmed the Il-14 was en route. A 2-seat Meteor night fighter, loaded with fuel, took off from Ramat David Air Force Base. Almost immediately, a technical fault forced the crew to jettison their external fuel tanks. They pressed on, conserving their internal fuel. Guided by ground radar from Mount Carmel, they tracked the target over the eastern Mediterranean. The navigator took over, his voice guiding the pilot through the darkness with rehearsed commands. The radar was fickle, its signal drifting with atmospheric changes. The pilot saw nothing but his instruments. Suddenly, the navigator's voice cut through. They were closing in fast. Through the fog, Sidin saw the blue flame of the Ilyushin's exhaust. Positive identification was crucial. American-made Dakota aircraft, similar in silhouette, were common in the region. The Meteor pulled alongside the darkened transport. Peering through the windows, the navigator could see figures moving inside, men in uniform. Identification was confirmed. The order to fire was given. Tracers lit up the night. One of the Meteor's cannons jammed. The low speed and recoil sent the jet into a dangerous spin. Only the hours of training with the Harvard saved them, as the pilot wrestled the aircraft back under control. The Ilyushin's left engine was hit and fell silent, its electrical generator damaged, preventing a distress call. The Meteor, now critically low on fuel, made one final pass. A collision seemed imminent. The pilot fired. A direct hit. The Ilyushin exploded in a fireball. The Meteor flew through the debris and emerged, miraculously unscathed. With fuel gauges reading empty, the pilot turned for home. The runway lights were switched on only at the last moment as he made a desperate landing. He had roughly 5 minutes of fuel remaining. This was the Meteor's final combat victory for Israel, and one of the most sophisticated night interceptions of its time. While 18 Egyptian military personnel were lost, the primary target, General Amr, was not on board, having changed his plans at the last moment. Egypt reported the plane missing and requested British help in searching the Mediterranean. Israel remained silent. The details of the operation would remain classified for decades. It demonstrated that even on the eve of a major conflict, a single, precise strike could cripple an enemy's command structure and alter the psychological balance. A day after this secret mission, Operation Kadesh began, with Israeli forces moving into the Sinai. The rooster had crowed. 13 years later, the name would return for an operation that swapped the sky for the ground, aiming to steal not a victory, but a secret. By late 1969, the war of attrition was grinding on. Egyptian air defenses, bolstered by Soviet advisors and equipment, created a formidable shield. A key component was the P-12 radar, known by its NATO reporting name Spoon Rest. Its long range made it the eyes of the air defense network. Bombing it was one option. Stealing it whole was another, far more audacious idea. The plan, dubbed Operation Rooster 53, was approved. It would involve paratroopers, engineers, and the newly acquired CH-53 Yasser heavy-lift helicopters. The first part of the name recalled the earlier night interception. The 53 referred to the helicopter type tasked with lifting the multi-ton prize. The operation was a clockwork of distractions. Israeli aircraft created diversions along the Suez Canal, drawing attention and jamming communications. Under this cover, 3 Super Frelin helicopters delivered a raiding force to a radar site on the western shore of the Gulf of Suez. The commandos neutralized the guards and secured the area. Engineers immediately began disassembling the entire radar installation. The antenna array, control van, and generators were carefully cut apart, each piece marked with colored paint for reassembly. In the dead of night on December 26th, the heavy-lift Yassers arrived. Hovering low, they hooked cables to the largest sections. Flying at wave-top height to avoid detection, they carried their precious cargo back across the water to a waiting landing zone in Israel. Every movement was precise, every sound minimized. Back in Israel, radar specialists and engineers took over. They reverse-engineered the P-12 down to its last component, studying its frequencies, its scanning patterns, its weaknesses. This hardware provided not just technical data, but a psychological blow. Egyptian troops waking to find an entire radar installation vanished without a trace, with no signs of battle, was a profound demonstration of vulnerability. The stolen radar eventually found a home in the Israeli Air Force Museum, a trophy from one of the most daring special operations of the war. Yet, sometimes the greatest deception is not performed under cover of darkness, but in broad daylight. In that same year, 1969, another plan was hatched that took audacity to a new level. The idea was to land an armored column on the Egyptian coast in broad daylight, disguised as an Egyptian unit, and wreak havoc deep behind enemy lines. The operation was given the ironic codename Drizzle. Planning was a joint effort between the Army and Navy. The force would use captured T-55 tanks, repainted in Egyptian sand colors with Arabic markings, and BTR-50 armored personnel carriers. Crews trained to drive and communicate like Egyptian soldiers. Landing and extraction would be handled by landing craft and naval commandos. The preparation took weeks. As a precursor, naval commandos conducted a diversionary raid north of the intended landing zone, destroying Egyptian torpedo boats and drawing attention away. On the night of September 9th, 3 landing craft silently deposited the disguised tanks and personnel carriers on the western shore of the Gulf of Suez. At 3:37 in the morning, the order was given. The column began moving south along the coastal road in plain sight, using standard Egyptian tactical intervals. Genuine Egyptian outposts waved them on, seeing familiar uniforms and vehicle markings. Their first target was an army camp. A brief, violent assault destroyed a radar and communications center. The pattern was set: hit fast, inflict maximum damage on command and control nodes, and move on. Israeli Air Force Skyhawks provided close air support and suppressed anti-aircraft sites. During one such sortie, a pilot was shot down and lost. The column continued its rampage, covering between 28 and 43 miles along the coast, destroying up to 12 posts and facilities. Egyptian forces, confused and believing it might be an internal mutiny, even called in airstrikes on their own disguised column. Friendly fire failed to stop them. After nearly 10 hours operating deep inside Egypt, having sowed chaos and destroyed key installations, the column returned to the coast. Landing craft were waiting. The vehicles were loaded with practiced efficiency, and the entire force withdrew. Israeli assessments estimated Egyptian casualties in the hundreds, while their own ground losses were negligible. The raid achieved multiple objectives. It forced Egypt to divert forces to protect its long coastline. It demonstrated Israeli initiative and capability to strike at will. It showcased seamless cooperation between Army, Navy, and Air Force, and it proved the viability of amphibious operations for heavy armor. The psychological impact was severe. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser reportedly suffered a heart attack upon hearing the news. In the aftermath, several senior Egyptian military commanders were dismissed. When you piece together these operations, a clear methodology emerges. They were not built on luck or miracles, but on 4 pillars: a precise understanding of the objective, an unwavering tempo of execution, masterful camouflage and deception, and a fundamental refusal to believe something was impossible. Almost always, they involved a perfectly orchestrated stage where sailors, soldiers, pilots, and engineers each played their critical part. To recap our countdown of daring, 5th place goes to the retrieval of the impounded missile boats from France, a masterclass in legal stealth. 4th place is the seizure of the Karine A, proving that the sea offers no hiding place for smugglers. 3rd place belongs to the night interception of the Egyptian transport, a manual in precision under pressure. 2nd place is awarded to the theft of the Soviet radar, a pinnacle of engineering and daring. And finally, claiming 1st place, is the daylight armored raid deep inside Egypt, an operation of unmatched camouflage and sheer nerve. Each story stands as a testament to planning, courage, and the relentless pursuit of a strategic advantage. If you found these accounts of historical audacity compelling, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with others who enjoy deep dives into military history helps these stories reach a wider audience, and subscribing ensures you do not miss future explorations of similar remarkable events from the past.